So with that, Jenny, it's 8:01. So why don't we get started? So over to you.
Let's do that. We'll just bring our slide deck up. And today, I think we have a picture. There we go. That glorious campus. You can tell it's winter only by the fact that there's no leaves on that wonderful row of trees outside of the front. As we like to, actually start all of our SATE sessions, especially here on a Friday, a moment of recognition and acknowledgement. We acknowledge that for those of us from Canada, we have a very important and serious role to play in advancing the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada's calls to action. So for those of us here in Calgary and those of us who work for SATE, we are situated on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy. Today, that encompasses our Indigenous people of the Treaty 7 region, the Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai, the Tsuut'ina, and the Stoney Nakoda, as well as the Northwest Métis homeland. We know full well all those names coming in there stretch right the way across Alberta, even across Canada. And beyond there, sometimes we've hit those global sort of reaches. So wherever you are today, thank you for taking a moment with us just to recognize the land that you're connected to.
Thank you. So this morning, individuals as leaders, individual contributors as leaders, essentially, just because you don't have a title doesn't mean you can't be a leader, I think is what we're getting at. And so I want to pose a couple of questions to folks in the chat. It might get a little messy. The first one's a little bit forward thinking as we look out to March. Any thoughts, topics you want to touch on that you think we would have a great conversation around? Feel free as we go through this morning to pop that into the chat. So that's one. I think the other question I would put out to the audience is when you hear this concept of individual contributors as leaders, what comes to mind? What does that mean to you? If you are an individual contributor, what does it mean to you? If you're a leader with a group of folks that you would like to see demonstrate leadership, what does that mean to you as well? We'll just let some of those come in there. Inspiring your team, servant leadership, influence. I just realized these could be answers to both of those questions, so that's good.
They could well be. Nice.
That's great. Well, that gives us some flexibility to go directions, Jenny. So
there we go. We can play on words. There's lots of good stuff coming in here. You know what, Craig? Pick one or another question.
Still do things, take on projects. And April's touched on an interesting one there. So I think for me, Jenny, when I think about this one and where we started this conversation coming into today was how can, as a leader of a group, you help your individual contributors demonstrate leadership or show leadership or become leaders within their own teams. In other words, I'm looking at this as a view of how do you help take a little bit of the pressure off the official leader of the group to find the others that can bring the group along. I'm going to throw that out there. Where does that go for you?
So I think first of all, it depends who the people are in your team. So you really have to know the people in your team. We're always saying that. And then the next part, perhaps more useful, is as a leader, what are the conditions that you're creating? So if you lead very much by, dare I say it out loud, micromanagement, control and command, that kind of leadership, you're actually stifling the opportunity of anybody to lead within your team. So the first thing to look at is what's my part in this? And so am I providing opportunities to grow? Am I providing space for people to speak up? Am I providing support? We talked, it was a few times ago about imposter syndrome. And there's a big piece out there that people who have imposter syndrome and as their leader, those are great people to keep an eye on because they really care about getting it right. They just haven't got the confidence to match their competence yet. Yeah. So there's a few ideas in there that if you grab hold of them, you could really help to build that leadership.
For sure. And there's a couple of comments here I just noticed that came back through. And I think this goes to, how do you create space for them Jenna, when they come to you with questions, question them back. I like that
Yeah,
to start
that's
with,
good.
right?
Yeah.
Right way. Get them to come to you with ideas and talk through possibilities. I love the fact that you didn't go to get them to come to you with ideas and the solutions, because people, if they're coming to you with a problem, they may not have a solution. It's okay
Yeah.
that this whole dynamic of bring us the problem and the solution actually is just going to stop people from bringing problems forward if they go, I don't know how to solve this,
Yeah.
right? So how do you create that environment? I think we can perhaps double click on that one a little bit, is how do you create that environment? Brent's also got a really good comment here, and I think it's a bit of the reverse of what we're talking about, right? Is a title does not bestow good leadership. Just because you have a title doesn't necessarily mean you are, in fact, a leader. You may be on
There's so much.
the head of the org chart, but you may not be a leader. And so
And that's another piece that I think really plays into this, because for decades we've relied on positional leadership. Positional leadership is when you have that title. So by title, I get to do this, that, and the other, and my decision is final. And fair enough. But there's two kinds of, let's call them power. We've got positional power and personal power. And everybody has personal power. Absolutely everybody. Some just don't quite know how to recognize their own or how to use their own. And that sort of individual contributor bubble is all about personal power. And actually what you'll find, I think, is the better leaders who do have a title are actually, they use personal power. And we've seen it in the chat. We've seen influence, removing ego, all those kind of things. That's all within that personal power bracket. They know how to use that effectively so that they're creating those conditions. And number one for leaders is, how are you helping your people grow?
yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, maybe let's go into that empowerment a little bit, because I've seen this come through. And for me, I think this is sometimes a bit of a buzzword, a bit of a cliche, when we say to leaders, go empower your teams. Right?
It's like, go motivate your teams. Is
yeah, exactly. So, do you have any thoughts around, we didn't probably necessarily think about this specifically coming into today, but any thoughts around practical ideas that leaders can use to help the individuals on their team feel empowered, right?
Yeah. So it comes down to support, I think. And when we're looking at that empowerment piece, when we talk about, this is a sidetrack, but when we talk about collaboration, one of the key factors in collaborating is, my job is not to shine the light on me. My job is to make you look brilliant. And so as a leader, how do you make your people look brilliant? And in doing that, when you give them credit, when they deserve it, when you, even if that's just supporting an idea, even if that's saying, that is a really interesting angle to look at this from, and I've never thought of it that way. Let's have a bit more of a conversation around there. What all of that says, and there's a lot more that we can do in there, but all of that says, actually, what you have to say has value. And so when we're talking about what do you need to be a leader, you're not one yet, you want to be one. The two main things are listen more than you speak, and speak up. So they don't match very well together, but that's a piece that we sort of encourage people to learn, is listen, and listen to connect the dots. Listen for what's missing. Listen for what's keeping your leader awake at night. Listen for where you can be useful. And then when you've thought about that, speak up. And that's where the imposter syndrome really plays a difficult part in this, because there's a little voice in some people's heads that says, why would you speak up? You're not anything here. All right, we're back to the conditions that have been set. So we go right back to what I said in terms of that support, that value. Then they know that they have value. Maybe they're only speaking up in your team meetings, but you then have the power to carry that beyond. And there's the mentoring that lots of people mentioned in the chat earlier too.
Yeah, I love the speak up piece. And I think, closing in on 25 years, that's a long time, in various leadership roles. That is, as a leader, it's sometimes my greatest frustration when I look at some of the teams I've had, and you can see the individuals in there that are kind of have it in them, for lack of a better phrase. I know that's very specific, but and then you just see the reluctance to speak up, right? And it's how do you draw it out of them? Lisa had a great comment in here about, amplifying their voices,
Yeah.
right? Which I think is fantastic. But as a leader, that for me has always been one of my greatest frustrations, is when you've got individuals on your team who are natural leaders and you can see everybody else on the team looking to them, and they don't necessarily know how to accept that mantle of leadership, or even more frustrating is when they just don't want to, which is also an interesting piece. But I think for me, the how do you get those who have it and just quite won't lean into it? How do you keep helping them do that?
You know exactly what I'm going to say, and you're going to roll your eyes. Have the conversation. There you go. but that's a one-on-one conversation. Like, we can't say it enough. Know your people. And so on your team, you've got those who literally just want to come and do their day job. For whatever reason it is, they just want to come and do their day jobs Friday. And then there's a really interesting, it's not our job to fix past history, to fix stories, to fix beliefs, but we have people joining the workforce even today, and even worse, our generation who are in the workforce, who have been taught to not add to the conversation. They've been taught to hang on to what they think they know, because if they give it away, they'll be next to go. And this gets really, really, it just provides tension in conversations, in team meetings. These are the tensions, the forces that work against leaders. And the only way that I think that leaders can break them down is to know their people and keep having those conversations. And so, if you have a team member who doesn't want to lead, who doesn't want to contribute, but they're doing their job to the expectation that's set, as long as you've had that conversation and you're both crystal clear that's what they want, fair enough, for X amount of time, not forever, you got to check in again. But if you've got elderly parents, toddlers, whatever else going on, you probably can only show up and do your job. And I know it's frustrating, but sorry about that.
And that's fair. And that touches a bit on the concept of everybody has their story that we may not necessarily know about. And as a leader, it's sometimes your job to try and figure out what that story is. There's a lot going past here around trust. And Wade, I've seen that. And so I think you might have a slide on that, Jenny, that maybe we could jump to.
Okay, we have one slide.
When you're in a team, and if you're that individual on the team, you have to have the trust of others that you know what you're talking about. But I think as perhaps those individuals that are reluctant to step up, you also have to trust the others on the team for not, I don't know, that's not the right phrase, for not, that they're not going to make fun of you or something like that, for taking that leap to jump into that leadership position. So thoughts?
Yeah. I think this sentence actually sums it up, and back to, I think it was Brent's comment, sometimes those who have a title aren't great leaders. People will follow who they trust, and trust is dramatically more just than an emotion or a something between us or within a group. And when we're working at SAIT, we use Charles Feltman's trust model, 4 pieces that make up trust: care, competency, sincerity, and reliability. And so if you're here as an individual contributor thinking, right, what can I do? I want to emerge as a leader. Like, my big idea, I'll give it away now, is this is the decade of leadership. There's huge conversations. Do we need managers? Whatever. It's all about leadership for the next little bit. And people follow who they lead. So what can I do to build care, competency, sincerity, and reliability with the people around me and with my leader? And as a leader, what are you looking for in those 4 domains? The other interesting piece in there, research tells us leaders are looking for different things in their people than their people look for in leaders. Ooh. So average, a leader is looking for reliability and competence more than anything else. Your people on your team, no surprises here, are looking for care and sincerity. So there's a Friday conversation in there, actually, just on those 4 domains of trust. Thanks for putting them in the chat too.
No problem. And so folks, just again, lots of great comments going here. Any specific questions that you may have as we've gone on here, feel free to pop them into the Q&A. I think we get so much out of the questions that you bring into this. Sorry, excuse me. Let's go back to the is it okay to just show up and just do your job piece? And I want to put some guardrails around this one, because yes, there are times, to your point, caring for an elderly parent, we all have these things that ebb and flow in our lives and our careers where, right now this is all I can do. But I think for me, part of this individual leadership piece is, how do you create that environment so folks want to do more than just their job, right? You can't have everybody wanting to rise up the ranks, because you just don't have the room for that.
Yeah.
But I would like to think you could create a situation where you want folks who want to excel, who want to do better, who want to demonstrate leadership. And just think about how strong that team could be if everybody on that team was doing that, regardless of position or title.
Yeah. So I think it's actually a really difficult question to answer. I think the answer to your actual question is, there have to be some people like that. And we always talk about the sort of day job and then the creativity and the innovation, and they're now merging together. And so if you've got people who just want to do their job, and you've got people that want to push the boundaries and create and lift it to the next level, and in order to do that, we've got to try something different. We've got to experiment with that part. We need the stable part to keep the day job going whilst we play in that space as well. So if you've got that kind of work situation, is it okay to have someone just show up and do their job? Yes. Back to your other part of the question, that is, what is the environment that we create that really what sort of encourages people to lift? And this, it's funny, it touches that, can you motivate people? The answer is no. People motivate themselves. But what we can do is provide conditions for growth. You can provide challenge. We talked about goal setting January, it was our first one in January. And we know that stretch goals, or all that sort of growth, that challenge piece, is fantastic as long as you're prepared to play your part as a leader. And so we're back to that support part within there again. Are you paying attention as a leader as well? And so if somebody says, I'd really like to give this a try, or you offer them that growth moment, they're going to present to senior executive. Are you paying attention to that? Are you helping them and then celebrating with them? And so a lot of that creating in the environment is, are you helping them lift from the bog standard day job? And in every job, that's not always possible. Sometimes just the day job is the day job. And then we've got to have that sort of look forward. Where do you want to go? How can we help you get to that part? People like to grow, I think, is the essence underneath there.
Yeah, and maybe that's where my internal friction on this one comes from, right? Is that I think there's a difference perhaps in Helen and Wade. I see your comments there, and I agree. What I'm not getting at here is that I agree that not everybody wants to be the leader. I do think that everybody can demonstrate leadership, which is, again, I'm getting away from the positional leadership versus everyday leadership. I think you mentioned that in one of our pre-conversations, Jenny. But I think we've also probably seen, we've had those individuals on our teams who don't actually want to grow. They literally are happy just doing what they are doing, right? And so that sometimes gets to be a challenge. There's some good questions here I want to get to. So let's see, Stephanie, how do you get your leader to provide more care and sincerity? It's hard to get behind someone who is insincere and or fake. This is true.
Yeah.
So you're thinking from the position of, my leader is insincere or fake, and I need them to show more care and sincerity. So how do you draw that out of your leader?
I don't know that I have an answer because we can't control another person. And so you can make a request and you can model. You can, I feel like we're all projecting something. You can definitely model how that's done. And that's often we have, there's no doubt about it. We have an awful lot of leaders out there. They're doing the best they think they can. They're not, we wouldn't class them in that this is a good role model to follow. And so if you're on a team like that, where you've got a leader who's insincere, doesn't show care, the empathetic part of me is always going to say, what's going on for them? Okay, but we'll move away from that. What can we do within our team? You're a team of human beings. You're very much allowed to be human. So how can you build that care and sincerity amongst yourselves? And if that's showing up in the team conversation, there does become an interesting disconnect, but you have got to be very disconnected not to notice it.
Yeah.
If the psychological safety is there, can you have a conversation? And it sounds, it's very much what we want to avoid is the blame, shame, and judgment always. So it's not, you never show me care, you're just lacking sincerity. I mean, I don't know who's going to say that to their leader. Maybe you would at your wit's end. But it can sound like, I would have appreciated some support in this situation. I'm wondering if I can ask for that. I'm struggling to put the words together here, but I think that if we take that ownership and if we have the psychological safety, it is a conversation that can happen. One of the big areas in this is you have to know yourself as an individual contributor and as a leader, and that leader may not know how they're coming across. We model what we've seen before, and my kids play competitive sport. We see this all the time. Coaches that have, they hold their kids at arm's length. The last thing they can do is show any sort of care there because they might have to bench them. And it drives me bonkers because if you care and if you have the conversation, that child's never going to mind being benched. But if you don't speak to them, you just ruin their week. Actually, let's be honest, you ruin their month.
Yeah.
So,
well, they might mind, but they would understand why it happened.
Fair. Absolutely fair. Yes.
Right. So
yeah, they care deeply too. Yeah.
But I think your point, and it goes back to a Jennyism, right? Have the conversation. And I think for me, if if you're in that position where you're going to your leader and you're having the conversation, you're saying, listen, I could use more of this. I could use your support. It would be great if you actually notice I'm busting my butt and perhaps not getting the support or offer of support or, hey, what do you need? I need that more often. Can you do that? And if your leader says, sure, sorry, thanks, I didn't realize I wasn't, and then they actually start changing, great. If they don't, unfortunately, I think at that point, you as the individual have a decision to make about where it is you are and what you're going to do.
Yes. And we said this before too, you're not a tree, so you're not stuck there.
That's right. Some other great questions in here. How do we lead in a remote world? And when your team is virtual in another city or country, it is hard to keep pulse on team morale when you're not there to listen or lead in person. 100% agree. We chatted about this one, I think a couple of months ago, but it is a great, it ties very much in here. Is how do you get your individuals to step up and contribute and share when you are in this remote world? We've talked about the fact that you need to be more deliberate in your communication and more intentional, but other thoughts?
Yeah, you just stole my thunder, I think. So that that cadence of communication when you're working virtually is really, really important. And it's important from the compassion side. How are you doing? Touching, having that touch point conversation doesn't have to be half an hour. It can be a text, for goodness sakes. It just needs to be that care piece in there. And then, are you actually expressing your expectations? And sorry for those who don't even have a sport mind attached to this, but I used to play field hockey, and I remember a coach saying to me and a fellow player, you two have been on this team for a year now. I expect you to show leadership on the field. And all of my life, I've been put in leadership positions, this, that, and the other. And it was like a 2x4 slapping me around the head, like, oh yeah, okay. And so we did, because he had simply said, my expectation is that you will show leadership on the field. Like, oh, all right then. And so sometimes as a leader, if you're noticing that somebody's got that or potentially has that, ask them, oh, we're going to talk about this next week. Can you speak up? I know you have some good ideas. I'd love the team to hear from you. And there was a note in the chat earlier, that extroverted versus introverted part. And, you know, for decades, again, we've followed, let's put the extroverts in the leadership position because they're gregarious and they show up and they're perfectly happy talking in front of thousands of people. Not always the best leaders. No. And so if you have introverted people on your team, and you know that because you know your people, set them up for success. Next week, I really want to dig into this. I would love to hear from you. How do we do that piece? Can I ask you to speak up in the meeting? No. All right, then how can we get your ideas in front of the team? What do you suggest? Give it back to them.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. There's tons of great comments in here. I always feel like I have split personality when we're in these conversations, Jenny. Yeah. Trying to manage this and listen to you because I don't want to miss what you have to say. Ian, yeah, I love your comment. It goes back to the previous conversation. 2 worst capital letters leaders I ever had talked with them. They changed artificially for about a week, and then the true personality came back to the surface, right? And so there's the perfect example I would go back to. If that's the case, yeah, it sucks. You then as an individual have the choice of, all right, I stay here and accept it, or I find a way to change my own conversation, right? Yeah. Doesn't mean you got to be planful, obviously, for your situation and how you're going to do that. But another good question here. How do you make time for everyone when you lead a large team of 30 direct reports? Wow. It's so difficult to keep them all engaged and motivated. Any tips for being a better leader to such a large team, especially while working virtually? Holy crow, Leanna, 30 direct reports.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I will have a beer for you tonight.
So that's really difficult. Always we go to, do you have some leaders within there? So this is going to make some people laugh, but we're going from the book of Jenny here. This is not in a textbook. I'm thinking on the spot, which is why I like Friday mornings. If you have that many people, you have in that many people different roles that are happening automatically. And I don't know what the technical labels are on those, but you've got the people who see the human piece. They see the human dynamics. They know what's going on. I'm not talking about gossip. That's a waste of time, but they do know what's going on within the dynamics. And they do know what's going on right at the sort of the front line, if you like. I'm guessing these 30 people are on the front line and you lead those frontline workers. So know who those people are and pay attention. Then in there as well, you've got some people, probably you got to look inwards here. Who have you not spoken to for the longest time? Stick them in a list and work your way through them. Now, if it's remote, it's harder, but send that message. I actually haven't had any airtime with you recently. Can I get 15 minutes? Or if you're back at work already, you're physically somewhere and there's a lunchtime, and my knowledge of unions is nothing. So if there's a union in here, I wouldn't know. But, can you go have coffee at lunchtime? Or can you go have a conversation and ask their opinion? Because really, underneath everything, humans have this need to be seen, to be heard and understood. And so I think if we take those 2 things to start with, you'd capture a lot of that 30 people. And my final part on that would be, how do you reach all 30 people? Now, it used to be that you had to have a face-to-face conversation, bring everybody in. Nowadays, we see companies using WhatsApp for their team. And is it a WhatsApp message on a Friday afternoon that says, I value the work you've done this week, have a great weekend? These are really tiny pieces, but to the people, the humans on the other side, they make a big, big difference.
Yeah. And on a more practical basis, I would be fighting every way I possibly could to get some different structure put in place.
And that's your job, yes.
I know
Yeah.
that's not, it's way easier said than done, right? But that's a long term, but 30 direct reports, wow. Christina, what are some tips to ease the transition from team member to team leader?
Mm.
And
if you're,
I guess
yes.
This for me would be the other part of this too. I think there's are you going from a member of the team to now leading that exact same team you were just a part of, or are you going from being a member of a team to leading in a different area? Because there's certainly some new, I've done the former, and you need to sit down and have the conversation, as Jenny would say, with the folks that you are now going to become the leader of. It will change your dynamic, right? And that's where you truly find those folks that you worked with who you thought were friends. Some of them may be true friends and will accept the transition fine. Others, not so much. And that's okay, because Jenny, I'm sure you've seen this many times.
Yes, and we get asked this question a lot, especially in that sort of supervisory level. I now have to lead my friends. What do I do? So rule number one, know yourself. Okay, absolutely know how you function, if you're somebody that takes rejection really tough, put your strategies in place to be able to help yourself. Alongside that, and again, you said it, Craig, is have the conversations with the people who are going to be on your team. Set yourself and them up for success. And then I think the other part of this too is, where are the boundaries going to lie? And that's part of the conversation as well. I used to go for beers with you on a Friday and we would gossip the night away. I can't do that now. I still would love to socialize, whatever else that piece might be, but I cannot be in those conversations anymore. That wouldn't be professional. And I'm going to hazard a guess, that's not what you would like from your leader. And as you said, some will do this and some will always be your friend. True friends will be around for a long time. So know yourself, have the conversation with the team that you're about to lead, and set and know your boundaries. And that allows you, when I was growing up, my dad used to always say firm, fair, and friendly. And if you've got those boundaries in place, it allows you to stick to them. You'll be fair to everybody, and you can always be friendly. It doesn't matter who you are or where you are. You have that ability. That bit's free, and you can do that easily.
Yeah, that's good. Ian, I love your comment there. You did for your dad. Well done. Anonymous attendee here. Perfect. I love this. Alternatively, how do you go from a leadership position to that of an individual contributor?
Well, this is so real. I didn't even think of this coming in either.
Yeah,
this is a Friday and a half.
It's a great question. Again,
it is a great question.
I think for me, it's again that distinction of, are you going from a leader of the group to being an individual contributor within the same group? In which case, I think you need to have a conversation with that new leader and figure out how you're going to give them their support and not undermine them and refer or defer your new colleagues back to their new leader, versus perhaps going from a leader into an individual contributor role in another team. So
if you've chosen to leave and go be an individual contributor for some of these times we do that to transition in our career or towards another opportunity, take all the leadership skills that you have and keep doing them. You just don't have the title and the authority. Don't step on your leader's toes. That's not going to set you up for success. In a lot of companies, and it's actually, I think the thought behind it is good. We're now looking at leaders being people leaders. And so what we've seen companies do is flatten. In order to flatten, they have to lose some of that leadership stream, but they know that they've got some really good people. So we want to keep you. And so now you're in the technical stream, which means we've taken your leadership title. We're still very connected to the value of that leadership title. So I think the piece to remember is, you're now not a people leader, but you are a leader and you are of value because they didn't ask you to go, they want you to stay. And I can't read the chat as we're going, but I've noticed a couple of times influence with authority or without authority, whatever that piece might be. You don't have the title, you always have the personal power to influence. And so now your role is, you know what it's like to be that leader. How do you make them look brilliant? How do you support them?
Yeah.
But you have huge value in your technical competence. How do you bring that with influence to make that team greater, better? And chances are, you know, the person who's now your leader, have the conversation. It's a gritty, possibly a little bit of a tense conversation. If we don't have it, we don't know. And then we just make up stories, and that's not helpful.
No, no, it's an interesting one. I've seen it happen a couple of times and seen it happen. Doesn't happen all that often. I think within the same team, I think it happens more frequently where, to your point, it might be more of a career transition where you're perhaps going from a leadership role at one company to an individual contributor role at another, right? And that gets to be a little simpler for.
Yeah. The other thing, sorry, one more thing, I just thought of it too. Often now, if this is happening now, it's new. This isn't a common pattern that we've seen for years. And so if the script isn't already written, write it yourself, take that opportunity. You write your job, okay? Chat to your leader. This is what I see I can do. This is what I can add. This is how I'd like to operate. What's the worst thing that will happen? No, I don't see it that way. Okay, now we're having a good conversation. How do you see it? Yeah. What can we build? Might be even better. You never know.
Yeah, so. No, for sure. How do you show management you're ready to move from an individual contributor role to a team leader role? How do you prove to them you are a leader? It's interesting, and ask for a more formal title.
I think if you've been building trust, all those 4 domains, if you've been paying attention, that listen, and you've been speaking up, the only one other thing you can do is say yes. And so when these opportunities come up, and I never used to do this, oh, I'm not qualified, I couldn't do that. Whereas now, well, that sounds interesting. Do I think I can do it? No, but I'll tell you what, figure it out. So say yes and then figure it out. And when you take those kind of courage steps, you actually build your resume, if you like. And when you've got enough of that behind you, there is no harm in saying, I think I'm ready to grow. What are the opportunities in front of me? Often management may not know. They have lots that they're paying attention to. So have that conversation, ask them, ask for the feedback, feed forward. We're going to talk about that next time, I think.
Yep.
But remember, when you ask for it, you're going to get it. So are you ready for that?
No, 100%. And I'd like to think too, if your leader, I'd be careful how I word this, I'll just say it and it'll land how it lands. But if your leader is doing their job, they're having those career conversations with you before you come to them to say, I want the next step.
Yeah.
They're doing the work ahead of time to find out what's driving you. What do you want out of your career? Do you just want to do your job, or do you want more, right? Some other good comments here. How do you get leaders to understand different personality types? I know individuals who have been reprimanded for not being soft enough, even though they are kind and hardworking, but they don't show it through soft language. Interesting.
Give them Craig's details and we'll come in and help out. It's a knowledge piece, and not everybody has that knowledge. And so it's a really good question. I don't know that I have an answer unless there's that influence piece. And so, you know, in all the different what are they called? The inventories, the assessments that are out there. Are you having a conversation about them? So if you've been somewhere and you've done your EQI, or the latest one hitting our desk is Lumina and Insights, all those kind of pieces, and you've done that, I mean, I don't know, you can see them, there's bricks galore behind me. Can you educate that leader and help them to know what they don't know? we can't know everything. So maybe they're just not aware of that. I'll noodle that question a bit more, I think.
Yeah, that was interesting. I mean, it's kind of running around my head too. But I think to your point, you have to be able to step up and share some of those examples of, you know, just because the language in that case may not be right, but the actions are. I think that's an
Is there,
important piece as well. So
and there's another piece too, as on the receiving end, you're playing victim or you're playing owner. And what was it? There was a company, I think they called it MRI, most respectful intent. And so, you know, some of us don't do very well with a hard tone and a abrupt manner. But if you actually take that step back and listen, you can hear if there is any care in it. And so we may just need to change what we're looking for, because not everybody is going to come and give you a nice big warm hug and say that was lovely. And so pay attention, I guess, again.
yeah, and it's also interesting, right? Because as a leader, when you're trying to communicate, you're thinking so much about the message and the words that you're going to use, which may work and resonate with one person. They may not work and resonate with another. The tone may work well with 99%, but if there's 1% that doesn't get your tone, like it's so difficult sometimes. And I think that's where, again, I'll go back to where we started. As that individual, you might have to demonstrate some leadership by saying, hey, is this what you meant? Because that's what it sounded like to me.
What I heard was, yeah, absolutely.
So that can be challenging too. Just holy crow, there's lots going on. There's one question here. What can you do if your CEO favors poor leaders who are their friends and openly rude to the leaders who are doing the good work? Be honest, my advice there is look elsewhere. Not to be too frank, but if that is truly what you're seeing, you've got a CEO who is overtly playing that game, I think you really have to ask if that's where you want to be. I'm not sure you have that ability necessarily to change, again, depending on the size of the company. Like the CEO of Fortune 100 is very different than a CEO of a company of 20 people, right?
And that's a culture piece too, and that's going to take a long time to change.
Yeah, absolutely. Just there's lots of great comments here, great questions. And I'm just trying to find one more when I'm looking at the time. So how do you accept as a leader that you are not perfect and sometimes you may make a mistake? Take ownership if you do make a mistake and find solutions. The perfectionism leads to feeling like an imposter. That's an interesting one. So how do you, it's not quite as simple as, well, just accept it, because we have this belief that the leader should always have the right answer and should never make mistakes. But thoughts on that one, Jenny?
I think that belief, I think we're carrying that. I think that's a legacy of that sort of glorified, how the leader should be. I think we've moved from that. The know yourself. So actually, I'm moving into what we're going to have next. I'm going to talk about a guide to me shortly. And if you're somebody who beats yourself up when you make a mistake and you hang on to that, you have got to know yourself there, because the minute that you're a leader, that internal voice, how you treat yourself, that's the most important thing that you have moving forwards. And so that would be where the work would need to go first is, okay, I've just realized I've made a mistake. Typically, this is what my action, no, I'm going to change this. And I'm going to own that mistake. And it's really simple. It sounds like this. I don't think that went very well. What could I do to make it better?
Mm-hmm.
And you probably find that your individual contributor, no, we're fine. Well, I'm not fine. I don't think that went very well. And I'm asking you for help. And that last tiny part of that sentence is the hardest sentence for any leader to say out loud. And
Yeah.
we talk a good game. Yeah, yeah. No, we're not very good at it. So swallow the courage pill, take the step, and go. And if you can't go there with your team member straight away, go ask somebody else.
Yeah.
Use the people around you. We all have a support squad. Use the people around you. What did we call them before? The generous critics. I think that's an Adam Grant term.
Yeah.
Who are they? And ask them for help.
Yeah. Perfect. Jenny, we are at 8:46.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and while Jenny's bringing up that last slide to kind of close us off, again, feel free to head over to our new LinkedIn page. Please follow it. You will see stuff about our new events coming up in there. We're really trying to start driving all the communication there. Folks, I got to say thank you. There's been a ton of great conversation in the chat. There's a number of questions here that we will try and get to in the follow-up. But Jenny, over to you.
Thank you. And yes, we will. We'll noodle some of the other questions too. It's hard when you're on the spot and then you think, oh, could have said this. So the big idea for this week, I've said it already, actually, this is the decade of leadership. And so what are you doing? What can you do? You know, if you're here high up in a company, what does your leadership pipeline look like? Not tomorrow, 3 years, 5 years, beyond there. We offer one big idea, 2 applied strategies. So the first of those, we've talked about it a lot, is know yourself inside and out. So if you are an individual contributor within here, what's your self-awareness like? How do you know about that self-awareness? Start to ask yourself those questions. If you're a leader, model this, make it easy for your people to be able to do this. One of the ways that we use in our sessions at Sage here is that guide to me. So what is it that people do that you easily give approval for? Do you know that for yourself as a leader? What are the things that trigger you into emotional intensity? What's your constant mood state? How do you think when it's feedback time or feed forward time? How do you like to give and receive? And then encourage your people to talk about that. Some of us, we spend 5 years getting to know that in our people. We could do it in one conversation with that simple guide to me. The second one to take away with you is that personal power piece and embracing your own personal power. So if you're a leader here, support your people to embrace their personal power, build their confidence, offer that care, make them look brilliant, give them the growth opportunities, and then support them. But for anybody and everybody here, we can do that for ourselves as well. And it just takes a couple of shifts in mindset to be able to do it continuously. The easiest one is when you look at something, listen to your rhetoric. Are you being a victim or are you being an owner? If you're being the victim, you're going to get stuck. If you're owning it, you'll be able to find the next step forward. Write it down. Then what does it take to do that? And then do it. Action is always a good idea. And then we finish with 3 questions. There's 6 today because I'm aware that we're talking to leaders and we're talking to individual contributors. So for anybody and everybody in here, what can you say yes to today that you wouldn't normally say yes to? Have a go. Do it. And somebody put it in the chat, fail, first attempt in learning. Doesn't matter if it doesn't work, just say yes and have a go. How will you be better today than you were yesterday? What can you do in that space? One tiny change. And who can you help or where can you help more? Be useful. And then for your leaders, we just mentioned it. How's your leadership pipeline? Have you actually looked at that? Do you have any idea what's coming and where? We've talked about a little bit in here, what environment are you creating? What are the conditions that you're setting up with your team? And I love this one, but who have you made look brilliant this week? And if you haven't yet, you've still got the whole of Friday. So go for it. You definitely can do that piece too.
Perfect.
There you go.
Thank you. And we are back in 2 weeks. We're going to talk about feed forward conversations because feedback just is a history lesson, I guess.
I like that. There you go.
There you go. So Jenny, thank you. I appreciate you. Thank you so much for your help and conversation here. Thanks to everybody that joined us this morning and have a brilliant Friday. Take care.
Take care, everyone.